A warm welcome to another episode of SciencePunk Explains the Frame Budget Approach. In our last explainer, we really dug into one of the most delicate concepts in the entire approach, the irreversible contribution. Well, now comes the real test.
How would we actually know if this whole idea of budgeted steps and irreversible change is more than just, well, a beautiful-sounding piece of conceptual art? Something that sounds good but doesn't actually connect with reality. That's the absolute gauntlet for any new perspective in physics. See, it's not enough to be elegant, you have to be testable. So today, we're going to put the frame budget approach through a serious methodological stress test. We're going to try and find its breaking points. Let's dive in.
All right, here's the plan. We'll kick things off with the burden of proof, what any new physical idea has to face. Then we're going to dissect the anatomy of a scientific claim to really figure out what counts as new. After that, we'll look at how a strong theory has to design its own breaking points. Then we'll ask, what is the actual signature of reality the FBA claims we can test? And finally, we'll see how this entire process logically pushes us away from these perfect, idealized models and toward the messy, real world of interacting systems.
So in physics, a beautiful idea has a really high bar to clear. It is absolutely not enough to just tell the story differently. A new perspective only gets physically interesting when it leads to things you can distinguish, right? To null tests, to new ways of comparing different situations. Conceptual elegance by itself, it just doesn't cut it. A theory has to prove it makes a real, tangible difference.
And this quote, this is basically the FBA's own declaration of intent. It's saying, hey, this isn't just a pretty picture we're painting. The claim is that it produces these hard, overdetermined consistency relations, these really strict mathematical links between things like geometry, dynamics, and energy dissipation. But honestly, the most important part of this quote is the admission that this is exactly where it can fail. That willingness to point to your own weak spot, that's what makes an idea physically serious.
So, if we're going to judge whether an approach, like the FBA, offers something genuinely new, we have to get super precise about what kind of claim it's even making. Because, not all scientific contributions are created equal. Let's break down the different levels here.
Okay, at the bottom you've got mere reformulation, basically just slapping new labels on old ideas. Definitely not new physics. A step up from that is heuristic gain, a cool new way to think about a problem. It's useful for sure, but it's not a discovery yet. Then there's methodological sharpening, which gives you a cleaner, more direct way to set up problems. This is incredibly valuable for researchers, but it's still not quite a new physical theory. The real gold standard, the only thing that truly counts, is genuine added structure, a framework that leads to brand new, distinguishable, and, this is the key, testable statements about how the world works. That's the bar. That's what the FBA has to clear. And, to its credit, the FBA is actually really upfront about its own structure. It sorts its claims into these three distinct levels. You've got the core FBA, which is the foundational machinery, the stepwise updates, the budget bookkeeping. Then you have FBA-compatible continuations, which are ideas that build on that core, like path bundles to describe possible histories. And then, at the very top, you have the boldest ideas, filed under hypothesis heuristic. Stuff like the super provocative statement that fundamentally there is no randomness. The FBA itself flags these as speculative, not as core parts of the theory.
And this brings us right to the crucial point. A really strong claim like least jam or no randomness is only physically meaningful if it comes with its own testable consequences. If you introduce a new assumption, but it doesn't lead to a new test you can run, then you're not doing physics anymore. You're doing metaphysics. It might be a fascinating thought, but it's not a scientific one until you can actually challenge it with an experiment.
This leads us to one of the absolute cornerstones of the scientific method. A strong theory isn't just about what it can explain. It's about being able to state with total precision what would actually prove it wrong. It's about the art of designing your own breaking point.
This principle is called falsifiability, and it's basically the bright, sharp line that separates science from non-science. Think about it this way. If there's no conceivable observation that could ever prove your theory wrong, then your theory doesn't really say anything concrete about the world at all. It's bulletproof, totally immunized against reality, and because of that, it's unscientific.
And this is where the FBA gets really serious about being testable. It doesn't just talk a good game about falsifiability, it actually builds it right into its formal structure. Any test within the FBA is formally defined by a trio of things. First, a specific question you're asking. Second, a measurable quantity that captures what you're looking for. And third, an acceptable margin of error or tolerance. So the outcome isn't some vague, oh, it seems to fit. No, it's a clear, binary pass or fail.
Now, a key tool for this is something called the Null test.
And it's really important we get this right. A null test is not about finding nothing. It's a highly targeted interrogation of nature. It's about deliberately creating a situation where if your hypothesis is right, a very particular difference must appear in a specific way, or, just as importantly, must not appear. It's a precision tool for revealing a specific effect or its definitive absence.
Okay, so that's the general logic of testing. But what does the frame budget approach specifically claim is testable? What is the unique signature it's supposed to leave on reality that we could actually go out and look for? Let's get concrete here.
First off, let's clear up a really common misconception. The FBA is not about testing whether time itself runs differently in some situations. That's not the language it uses. Instead, what the FBA proposes to test are the differences in the realization of that stepwise budget-constrained development. It's all about how those budgeted steps actually unfold, not about some background clock speeding up or slowing down.
So when does this approach actually become testable in the real world? Well, it happens in those sweet spots where different ways of realizing these budgeted steps, so different physical processes, lead to measurement signatures that we can actually put side by side and compare. The test isn't on the step in isolation, but on the comparable outcomes of different sequences of these steps.
And this lets us formulate some really subtle but maybe, just maybe, measurable questions. For instance, could we test for the difference between something being truly gone forever, absolute loss, versus it just being out of our reach, operationally inaccessible? Could we look for signatures of a system's history becoming harder to reconstruct over time, or maybe see evidence of an increasing asymmetry between forward and backward paths? These are the kinds of subtle effects on irreversibility where the FBA might make a unique testable claim.
Now, something really cool happens when you take this demand for testability and you follow it to its logical conclusion. It actually forces you to move away from the simple, clean, idealized systems we love to think about in physics, and it pushes you towards something much more realistic. This slide here captures a core shift in perspective. In a lot of traditional physics, an open system, one that's interacting with its environment, is seen as a messy complication, right? It's a disturbance you try to get rid of. The FBA completely flips this on its head. It argues that openness, interaction, this coupling with the environment, that's not a defect. That is the physical norm. The perfectly isolated system, that's the real abstraction.
So you can see this clear, logical chain forming. Step 1, our commitment to testability means we have to hunt for genuine physical differences. Step 2, so where are these subtle new differences most likely to actually show up? Probably not in a perfectly isolated box, but in a dynamic system that's constantly interacting with its environment. And step 3, this path naturally leads us right to the doorstep of studying open systems and to taking a much deeper look at the physical process of measurement itself.
So if we pull this all together, what are the big takeaways from today's methodological stress test? First, good ideas are simply not enough. Physics demands theories that make distinguishable, testable statements about the world. Second, a strong theory knows how to fail. This principle of falsifiability, of designing your own breaking points, that's the line in the sand between physics and metaphysics. And finally, and maybe most importantly, a rigorous demand for testability actually pushes us toward reality. The FBA's own test logic forces us to move beyond abstract ideals and toward the complex, interacting open systems that make up the real world.
Which, of course, leads us right to our next big question. What actually happens when a system isn't perfectly isolated from everything around it? In the next explainer, we'll look at why real physical systems are almost never perfectly isolated, and why that matters so much for the FBA. Bye for now until the next episode, and stay curious.